Hey everyone, and welcome back for a new special collection video. This time, just looking at my current up-to-date roster of limited run games. Now, first I'll be showing a few games that do not actually have official limited run numbers on them before I show the official regular line. First up, we have a few PS4 ones that did not, unfortunately. First up, of course, we have the indie game called Among the Sleep Enhanced Edition. Like you see, there's not even a limited run logo or anything anywhere on the case. Very interesting game. It's actually somewhat we consider a family-friendly horror game. Next, we have the, well, it says Deluxe Edition, of course, of Those Who Remain, which is another indie horror game. Now this one has a limited run logo, but still does not have an official limited run number on it, which is why it's not part of the normal lineup. This was sort of like, I guess you could say, was a third-party seller in this case, developed by someone else but sold through a limited run. Next, surprisingly, that does not actually have an actual limited run number is this, though. Again, it does have the limited run logo. The only one that's officially numbered is the collector's editions. Then we have one, like collectors, I guess you could say, big box set that is not officially numbered either. It was just sold through a limited run. Really, there's nothing too impressive or special about this, but if you are a fan of this specific hack and slash series, it is a pretty cool game, and surprisingly relatively cheap, probably because it was in a high-end demand game. But that's it of the PS4 stuff I have that does not have official numbers. Quickly show I have two Switch games that also do not have official numbers either. First up, this game, which does once again have the limited run logo on the back, but does not have an official number. And the same for the only other one, Sea of Solitude, which doesn't even have the limited run logo on the back anywhere, as you can see. Sorry about that, decided to freeze to get stuff rearranged properly. Next, we're going to look at the what PS4 stuff I have. First up, this is arguably the oldest limited run game in my collection. Of course, like it also says, limited edition. And to show you how old this is, yeah, this is number 6 on the PS4 line. It's a really cool, like, indie game, though, I will say. If you like classic, like, Unreal shooter games of the past, arcade-style stuff, you definitely appreciate this game. Next, we have an interesting, technically collection of minigames in one, called the Bit Trip. Now, this did have also like other versions released. Now, of the 6 mini games you get in it, my personal favorite is probably Bit Trip Runner. It is arguably my favorite of the mini games, which is this game. Now, this also, some of stuff, believe it or not, got like an official release on the 3DS as well. Now, this game is arguably pretty cheap compared to many limited run games. Next up is one that is going for a bit more. I looked at last year when they were doing their New Year's Day like clearance sale to clear out the old warehouse. And I got this physical copy of course, the incredible indie game known as Celeste, with arguably one of the best, I think, soundtracks of any indie game. If you ever get a chance, I do recommend highly checking out Celeste. Next up we have, of course, the classic beat 'em up based on old school games, Rival City Girls, which I do recommend highly checking out. Done by Way Forward Games. If that sounds familiar, that's the company that does the Shantae games. Basically, limited run and stuff is one of the only ways you can get physical versions of probably about half of Way Forward Games roster. Still a superb beat 'em up game based on the old classics that I do highly recommend checking out. Next we have, of course, this very unique game, which of course originally was released on the PS2 and known overseas as Fahrenheit, which is a really cool and unique game. It was definitely ahead of its time when it came out back in the, I believe it was mid-2000s. Next up we have, which was the first actual limited run game I technically bought directly from Limited Run. And of course that is Streets of Rage 4, though now you can find it in normal stores, regular versions. But this still remains a limited, of course, release version of the game. With, I think, pretty, which I really like also the cover art of this version. Also, speaking of stuff, Way Forward Games, Shantae and the Seven Sirens, which was the first physical Shantae game I collected. It's definitely good. I wanted to get the Switch through, like, Best Buy, because regular limited run version was already sold out. But, even though they were sold out the Switch version, they still had quite a few of this version of the game. I think you might even still be able to get it on Best Buy's website if you're interested at all. Next up, we have a indie game, which I do highly recommend getting this if you can get digitally for a good price or some. Or can look out, check their Best Buy's website for a while. They also had this available on BestBuy.com. Outer Wilds is a really cool puzzle survival game. And it has also a very interesting premise compared to many other games at the time. Next, we have a special, of course, physical re-release remaster of the classic SNK game, Mark of the Wolves, which is argued by many people be considered the greatest SNK fighter of all time. And at least when it comes to animation, quality, sprite work, this game is incredible. Of course, this would also be the debut of Rock Howard, and my personal favorite version of Terry. Next up we have, of course, an incredible game done by the great Lucas Pope, as I've talked about before, with his second game, which also, like his first game, incredibly underrated, and that is, of course, Return of the Oberdin. An incredible game that is hard to believe that it was made by one person. And I love the, like, art style they went with the game. Somewhat simplistic, but it is kind of cool. It's like a breathing, like, video game equivalent to just opening and wandering through like a classic detective novel, which is actually really cool. Which I actually appreciate, and I like the black and white coloration elements to the game. It is quite fascinating and very unique in a sea of so many so-so indie games. This, as well as the predecessor to this, of course, the previous game, Papers, Please, both incredible top-notch indie games from Lucas Pope. Next, a re-release of a classic known as, of course, Samurai Jack. Battle Through Time, which is a great game, of course, and I'm sure anybody who grew up in like the early to mid 2000s knows very well Samurai Jack, and of course now you can watch the entire show on HBO Max if you have it. But seriously, this is a great game. I played it like a long time ago. I still need to get around to playing this version of the game, see how it plays. And I may do a record playthrough when I do play it for the first time. Well, the redone version anyways. Next up again, we're going back to SNK with another re-release of another classic 2D fighter. And of course, arguably, in my opinion, one of the best, probably weapon-based fighting games of all time. I would dare say this is probably my top 10 favorite weapon-based fighting games ever. It is great and superb, and it's better than at least half of the Samurai Showdown games in my opinion. Now sadly, if you want an actual original version of this game, good luck given the price. Heck, even this is now going for a lot of money online, unless you got it right when it was pre-orders were offered, which I paid, I believe it was like $30 for this. But now it's going for like 4 to 5 times that price, so yeah. Always keep an eye out on there for SNK Fighters. Next up, a great, incredible, and pretty much my introduction to 2D horror games, which I'm glad I actually chose to give a shot to Darkwood. It is an incredible, really creepy, great atmospheric game for a 2D horror game that I do highly recommend checking out. It's fun, investigating things, and it really does do a good job at capturing the necessary mood that you need to get that feel of dread while playing the game. And that is, in my opinion, one of the defining things of a great horror game is a game that always constantly keeps you on edge. Next up, we have, once again, SNK, and of course that is the remaster or re-release of the classic Art of Fighting anthology, which of course is a collection of 3 classic Art of Fighting games. Another incredible series, of course, one of the key figures in this series obviously is none other than Mr. Karate, which I think is definitely an OP boss. That's nothing new for SNK. Next up, which I have off somewhere to cite that came with this, of course, the physical release of Panzer Dragoon Remake, which is an incredible game, which I've already done a full playthrough of before. If you're at all interested to look at how the game looks, it's a relatively short game. I mean, you can beat this game probably in 15 minutes in one sitting, or it may take a little over an hour, depending on if you have any previous experience or not playing on-rail shooters or any Panzer Dragoon games. Nevertheless, it is an incredible game. I highly recommend checking. Next up is arguably, I think, one of the most unique games, bar none, that I have so far done on Limited Run. And that is the game known as After Party. A very unique concept game compared to many other indie games, and that's what I'm always looking for when it comes to checking out new indie games. Is always looking for something that has its own sort of feel and unique flair about it. That's the key, because there's so many Castlevania, or rather Metroidvania games by indie developers. It's hard to find a good one. Same thing can be said for like roguelikes. You just have to take your time and investigate and do your research. And sometimes you'll look out just by random. This is another game that I do highly recommend looking into. And I believe you can get this at Best Buy's website. Only a couple more left for the PS4 version, part of the collection. We have, of course, Star Wars Republic Commando Classic first-person shooter game during the Clone Wars era, done originally on like the original Xbox, which I'm happy got a re-release, because this is, in my opinion, one of the greatest Star Wars games ever released and made. Next up, sadly I have on the side, but this is a indie style game heavily influenced by Star Wars pod racing. You can definitely see the influence, but it also has, uniquely enough, a story mode. I like the bright colors and the atmosphere setting, plus you have up to like 4-player co-op, 4-person you can do on like local, which is cool that there's that indie games are trying to keep alive like local multiplayer and stuff. I actually appreciate that. Last of from this batch is a game that you'll be seeing in a future pickups episode, because I haven't shown it yet. It's a very unique game called Roomba First Blood. Basically, you play as a robotic vacuum cleaner, and your job is basically to protect the house from criminals breaking in and trying to steal stuff, and you're supposed to kill them as a like robot vacuum cleaner, which is kind of funny in a way, but it very much gives the game its own very unique flair, and it's nothing like any other indie game I have seen, in all honesty. Definitely has a lot of originality, which I appreciate. That's it for the regular PS4 stuff. Now, at the end of this video, I'll be showing some collector stuff. Once I get done with the Switch, I'll show what couple games I have for Vita, which is not many. First up, of the Switch stuff that, of course, I got. My first one would be Night Trap, which is, yes, a really stupid game, to be honest. Like, back in the day, years and years ago, played it on the 3DO. Very interesting experience, to say the least. But I still like the game, and it still amazes me how much controversy this game created back in the day, given, well, nowadays it's only a T rating. It's a really stupid and really cheesy, like, cheesy horror, I guess you could say, sort of feels like a B-rated horror film. And maybe, for me, that is just what appeals to me, because I love my B-rated horror films. Next up is an incredible game that I looked at last year with that wholesale thing that was going on. Of course, that is Bloodstained Curse of the Moon 1, which I love the cover art. And you can definitely tell it involved people from the, of course, classic, in my opinion, the prime era of Castlevania. Next up, also taking advantage of during the sale last year, was these two games. Re-releases of the classic N64 games, of course, Torok and Torok 2 Seeds of Evil. And we don't really need to acknowledge the other Torok games after Seeds of Evil. Now, of the two games, story-wise, I would say Torok 1, single player, is probably my favorite, but Torok 2 was my favorite when it came to, like, local multiplayer, like 4-player mode and stuff. It was far superior to the first game. It's still, though, a great game. I recommend playing, especially given that these versions are like PC, and you can like adjust things like textures and everything, which is honestly really cool feature to have. Next up we have, of course, the classic original Myst, the beginning of a classic era, like point-and-click game, well, puzzle game with surprisingly very good done graphics for how old the game is. I also have this game, of course, on the Panasonic 3DO as well. The actual original version of the game, which is awesome. But still, I like the fact they actually remastered this all-time classic. Myst is a series that I will always love. Speaking of stuff I will always love, also, Panzer Dragoon remake for, of course, the Nintendo Switch, which is another incredible, awesome game. Like I said already for the PS4 version. Nothing different though. I am amazed at how good it also plays on the Switch. Next up, if you're an old school Doom fan, of course this game needs no introduction. Classic game for the N64 era. And that being of course Doom 64. Now I like this just because it plays actually a bit smoother, I would say, than the N64 version. Though it's been quite a few years since I've actually played this game on N64. So it was definitely cool to get the opportunity to pick this up for the Switch. As somebody who remembers playing a lot of first-person shooter games on the N64. Next up, awesome, of course, re-release, of course, that is Shantae, the classic original. I am glad to have this in my collection. I would wish I could have gone back in the day and gotten this with the Game Boy Color, but yeah, that game is going for an insane amount of money nowadays, so might as well forget that. This is arguably probably the best way. Now, if you don't care about physical, you can always get digital way cheaper, but as for me, I just like having physical. Speaking of Shantae, I also have Shantae Risky's Revenge. Of course, director's cut. Very interesting game to say the least. Also a fascinating game I got last year. A really cool RPG 2D that really harkens back to the Super Nintendo era in my opinion. Cthulhu Saves Christmas, which is just awesome. Next up, a really cool and I think criminally underrated game. With great music, looks gorgeous, To the Moon. It's a fascinating indie game in my opinion. That I think it just, for a 2D game, it like has beautiful, excellently well done sprite artwork. And the soundtrack, the music is superb in the game. Of other, though, classics, I am glad that it got revived. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, which is awesome. Once again, if you like arcade beat-em-ups, this is a must-have game in my opinion. Second to last, Star Wars Rogue Commando, or rather Republic Commando. Arguably, I haven't played this version of the game yet. I've only played the PS4 version remaster, which is great and I do highly recommend checking out. Also pretty awesome, Bug Fables, the Everlasting Sapling, which is more or less which is obviously an RPG. And I like also the cel shade artwork that this game uses. It's very interesting. Plus it's an interesting concept playing with bugs as well. Now quickly, before I do what really the collector stuff I have, the only 3 Vita games I have unfortunately. First up, that being of course Oddworld Stranger's Wrath HD, which I think is awesome. And a criminally underrated. I actually would dare say, probably for me, my favorite of the traditional Oddworld games is probably Abe's Exodus, though I would say, other than that, probably Stranger's Wrath is like my second favorite Oddworld game. Though I still really haven't played too much yet of Soulstorm, so we'll see on that. Next up, another game I already showed, called The Bit Trip. But I can't resist. If I have the opportunity to get anything for the Vita, I will get it. And if the price is reasonable like this was, definitely jump at the chance. The only other game I have on the Vita, of course I've already mentioned, from Lucas Pope, and that is of course Papers, Please. Which is once again as I said, a very awesome and unique game to say the least. Just like Return of the Oberdin. I only have a few collector's things here. First up, and of course, designed like the original N64 box, which I love, of course, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer. As you all know by now, I actually love Star Wars Episode 1, the movie. Unlike most people, and I absolutely adore this game, still have it on N64. And happy about that. But I love the homage to the original classic in 64 with this awesome case. Next up is the jumbo-sized box, of course, for the awesome and epic Samurai Showdown Neo Geo Collection, which is awesome. Looking at, I love this giant's oversized box. I love the cover art, absolutely. And I'm just happy with all this awesome SNK stuff we're getting. Next is the collector's edition of course, Bloodstain, Curse of the Moon #2. And I also absolutely love the homage to old school Castlevania artwork on the front of this box. It's just awesome looking with that dragon creature breathing the fire and the knights. Love it. Second to last, we have two SNK things. First up is, of course, the special collector's version of Kino Fighters 2000, which by now, if you've listened to me, you know KOF 2000 is my personal favorite Kino Fighters game of all time. Like I've said before, unpopular opinion, I know most people go with either Kino Fighters 97 or 98 or something. But for me, it's 2000. Also, you'll be seeing a future edition video of pickups. You'll be seeing this. The collector's edition of course, Kino Fighters the Orochi Saga, which includes Kino Fighters 94, 95, 96, 97, and 98, which is awesome. But with that said, hopefully you enjoyed this little up-to-date version on some limited run stuff that so far I'm up to. Filming this on New Year's Day 2022. Hard to believe we're already here. And quickly, before I get off, if you're curious about the music in the background, this is music from Minecraft. But with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Stay safe. See you again. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel, and hopefully 2022 ends up better than 2020 or 2021. We shall see. See you soon enough.